Are we online already?
Yes, we are. And we'll start just in a second. Just a couple of seconds more and we'll start. And we also have a live video on YouTube, so we're all set. And okay, well, maybe let's start. Hello and welcome to our next event in the series of talks, Architectural Deschooling in the Age of Quarantine. My name is Alexander Strogorsky, and these talks are based on the idea or the assumption that architectural education is in the process of transformation, and the quarantine and pandemic and the kind of experiments with the distant learning and virtual learning that all of architectural schools around the world were involved in this spring and summer, and maybe we'll have to go on with that during the next academic year. All of these experiments, they only show us how much we probably want to change in architectural education fundamentally, not only on the instrumental level. So that's why in Moscow Architecture School March, we decided that we would like to talk to as many educators and architects with educating experience as we could, to try to understand what's going on and where we would like to head ourselves, since March is quite new school and we have some room for experiment and some room for change. And each conversation, this conversation, as many others before, will be held in English. If you need Russian translation, you can use the globe icon on your Zoom panels. Как и предыдущие встречи, это пройдет на английском. Если вам нужен перевод, то на панели Zoom можно найти значок глобуса и переключиться на тот язык, который вам удобнее. And in each conversation, participants are welcome to define what they want to talk about, and we don't have any particular questions or leads to follow. But what is interesting is that in this case, each conversation is different because it is based on experiences of particular participants. Also, we trying to address personal experiences rather than institutional ones. So those who talk to us, they are not representing any particular schools, and they free to address the experience on a wider level. And what about our guests today? I'll introduce them very soon. We have guests from two architectural and, well, modern architectural multidisciplinary practices with a very similar names, which is really fun. Space Popular and KOSMOS.
Yeah.
KOSMOS Architect. Yeah. Lara Lesmes and Frederick Helbeck from Space Popular, an English-based design practice with a very wide spectrum of projects, from exhibitions and virtual reality projects to educational and real architectural projects, as much real as it could be today. Let's maybe talk about that later. And KOSMOS architects, who are well known in Russia, but coming from Russia, but based in 3 or 4 or 5 cities at once, from New York to Graz and Zurich and Basel and so on. And both practices are not new to these distant and virtual modes of architectural production and communication, since KOSMOS is working in remote modes since the very beginning of the practice, and Space Purple are working on architectural media and virtual media also very, very intensively. As usual, the last thing that I would say in this introduction is that somewhere along the road, we would really like to have your questions, and we will address them to our speakers. Well, maybe in 40 minutes or an hour, depending on how intense the communication would be. This is where I stop. And please, Leonid, Artem, and Lara, and Frederick, please start.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alexander, and in general, Marsh School for inviting. If you guys permit, maybe I can start with the first question. We're very happy to be here. And I mean, we discussed a little bit with Frederick and Lara what topics worry us, what topics are interesting to us. But I was thinking to start with kind of, because I think our both offices, we kind of like to dream. So I wanted to ask the question, when we met first time, so we met in Bangkok with you guys, but somehow we overlapped. I think we met actually through Zoom, or through Skype. Then Zoom was not so popular. And
or even Google Hangouts,
or maybe even
back
Google.
then. And now what has happened? I mean, that's a whole topic in itself, no? Why Zoom has taken over the world?
Yeah, anyway, carry on.
Exactly. Yeah, and then I remember that after we kind of virtually met, you left to England, to AA from Thailand, and we moved to Thailand. But I have heard, maybe tell me, maybe it was wrong, that from some other colleagues that you were even thinking of making your own school at some moment based in Thailand. And I can imagine that this is kind of a dream school. And maybe we can start with the question, how would you imagine, maybe you have even some thoughts from back then, what would be the main principles before starting kind of criticizing what we have now and the problems which we have? Maybe we can start with this question. What was this, basically what was driving your idea of this dream school?
The dream school was a school in Southeast Asia where you got paid to go to school. That was the dream school. It was more thought of as a sort of research center where we were, as you experience yourself as well in Bangkok. It's so incredible how much you can do, because construction, fabrication is available at your doorstep. You don't have to order things from another country or spend impossible amounts of money to do a prototype of a piece of furniture, or even like a prototype of a small pavilion or something. You can do it. So we kind of wanted to create an environment for experimentation that could take that opportunity really much further, and even maintain that infrastructure, because you see in places like in Spain, where there is also that sort of infrastructure where you can make really custom stuff and try things out. It's kind of disappearing just because no one is demanding that, and things go more and more towards standardization, and then you start creating this distance in between. Well, one of the things that you guys were writing as a topic, that is like that distance in between academia and the everyday of practice, and then you arrive to practice and need to train yourself again in how things are actually made and put together, whether you're doing physical or digital stuff, because you don't learn to do either.
I guess at the core also was the idea, or the dream was for a school that was truly like independent. You know, I'm sure we'll talk about this as well, the kind of how, like, the role of independent institutions, and certainly in Bangkok, but all around the world, a lot of experimentation in architecture is in some few cases kind of propelled or accelerated by bureaucracy, or not bureaucracy by itself, but complex big institutions. But in Bangkok, we were really keen to have a small school with good, it would have been based, like Lara said, on good funding, but where decisions could be made very, very quickly. And we had an amazing team of people, and then for a variety of reasons, it didn't happen, but we were very, very close. And I guess also you guys have also, anyone who has been teaching architecture, I think, has an idea of what the sort of dream school would be.
What do you think?
Yeah.
What's your dream school to teach in or to study in? I guess it may be even different.
We actually had a dream school, but I think it started not about the certain method. Oh no, it was exactly about certain method of education. I think like 5 years ago or so, we with Leonid thought about different charity projects, and we by then we weren't able to teach properly or like participate in education process properly, but we were very interested in that. So we even thought about opening like online school which you would make sort of charity. It's probably in opposition to your plan, was absolutely for free. So where people from different regions, like from very poor regions, could have access to the knowledge, so it would be kind of like absolute charity project. Of course, like we were more discussing this, and then unfortunately it never happened, but probably we still can keep it like in the back of the mind, this kind of project. But that's what we experienced now during pandemic, that when all education went online and most of the lectures, they actually available to public, not only to students. So I can see now, not being student of any university, like enormous amount of different lectures from different people. And it looks like education, like nowadays, almost happening in Zoom, but I got a feeling not exactly. And here we try like to bring another topic. Where would lie this border in between digital education, physical education? What was Lara, you was speaking before? What should be the media, the most efficient media of communication with the students? Is it only like personal meetings and sketching? Is it just studios? And or probably no, Leonid, probably you can continue my question, elaborate a bit more if you have something to add.
Oh, no, unfortunately, due to some technical things, I missed some of the recent. So
yeah, it's getting choppy.
Yeah, exactly.
But we could hear you perfectly. Yeah. Hopefully, Nid, it will.
I think it's getting better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's one really just interesting question you hear from so many people I know from in this series. When Sam Jacobs and Tom Emerson were talking, they were both of them reflecting on the fact that architectural education seems to work quite well for this weird format that at least for us. But I mean, to begin with, perhaps with our students at the Architectural Association, the projects are literally about virtual inhabitation. So of course that somehow fits, and of course the students' projects all of a sudden became, in a variety of ways, became very relevant. But on top of that, I mean, Tom and Sam, they teach very different things, and Sam has been doing this incredible desktop academy and many other things, and both of them said that it seems to be more or less seamless. And I've been trying to think, like, what is it with architectural education that makes this fine? I think I have some ideas.
I mean, makes it okay, as in like practically it works. But I think a big aspect of architecture education, and I don't know if it was also for you, but is that you go to school for a certain number of years. Even if you go for a couple of years to school to do a master, right? You develop a network, and you develop a network of friends, and probably you end up becoming friends with people who is doing work that you find interesting and they find interesting, and then you remain connected. And no one speaks about that. A huge part of your future might be those connections. If you don't happen to be some amazing family connections where you like come out of school and have your projects lined up, is a lot of it is going to rely on you knowing other architects, and starting slowly to appear in places, and people start to see you and your practice and to know you and your practice, and therefore you start getting projects. It all will rely a lot on those people and how those people will lead you to more people. So I think a big problem with these platforms is that they don't allow for social bonds to develop yet, right? Then what we are really keen on is virtual spaces where actually you can start. At the moment, they are still super uncomfortable. So we are obsessively working with that, knowing that it's still not quite there, but also knowing that it will be there very soon. And when remote gatherings can have that social hangout in a way that it works, in a way that we don't have to take turns to talk to each other, in a way that it seems somehow meaningful without having a scripted or a event taking place, then I think it's possible. At the moment, I don't know.
But it still works relatively well. According to us,
Practically.
our students' projects were more or less completed as we hoped they would be. How do you feel?
Well, it was very interesting what you said about this informal communication and networking which you have in university. Because at a certain moment I was like replying myself to the question, why do I go for the lectures, like for open lectures? Because it's not actually to, I mean, also to hear to the lecture, but if I want to really hear the lecture, most of the lectures I can get online, take comfortable position in the chair, and in the evening, in comfortable time, watch it, not like standing in a badly ventilated room behind the column in the dark. Obviously, in terms of exchange of in terms of understanding of the lecture, it's much easier online. But of course, apéro and meeting the people, it's much more important in these events, and or like possibility to ask the question. But now online, we also can ask any question. But then I start to think, okay, this networking probably even more efficient could work on Facebook group of university of the class. So apparently they could also make all the networking there and exchange opinions. But the other thought which I received immediately, that it's very different the way you communicate in digital platforms and in real. You rarely be so informal or so, let's say, emotional as you are in real world. So that's very interesting to see, like to understand if we would continue to teach only online, how architecture would change. Because as well, many things which are interesting to discuss, not so interesting to present. And it's very different like way of presentation. One is like slideshow or video, which you present online. And the other one is like live performance. And any recorded live performance would never compare to to live performance. And
yeah, I agree. I mean, for me, the main difference, as you know, we kind of already got used to working online, and then suddenly the recent quarantine started, and we had to teach online. And I felt that somehow, although for let's say business meetings, sometimes it's more efficient to do everything online. Like sometimes even a video call is not necessary. And then with students, somehow I felt that we also did the projects and we finished them. But we discussed with my assistant that we somehow survived through this time in terms of, I think, emotionally survived. It's not that like the project were okay, like everyone passed. We also didn't get fired, like nothing dramatic happened. But I think no one kind of enjoyed the process. I don't know if it was the problem of our organization that we didn't, but at the same time, the business meetings online kind of do not bother me so much, because I don't consider them a time for potential also fun and exchange. You kind of consider them as a goal-oriented meeting where you just need to kind of to cross out points and to make minutes and to make next goals. Whereas with students, you kind of want to, I don't know, sometimes to laugh, sometimes to experiment, to brainstorm, and then this really doesn't happen. And I even remember I proposed, like many were doing the apero, and like the students were really not, I mean, everyone did it, but it felt really forced, like as if I'm like an animator who was trying to give some human touch to this otherwise very very goal oriented and very
great. You receive anyway only after apero, and they
yeah, I think, I mean, actually, I don't, I don't know, I had a different experience the past months. I thought teaching online was actually really, really quite okay. And in some cases, even more, like I prefer looking at my own screen than sitting in the studio space in school, looking at the student screen. And some, like in a way, it became even better. People was better prepared for each meeting or tutorial or presentation. It was really good. That it almost makes me think that I wouldn't mind being teaching students online, and then that there would need to be some sort of hub or location where the students can come together themselves, and maybe also the tutors sometimes. But I would think about that more as an institution that is a sort of event space. So I don't think it would be too wild to speculate on a potential future for schools, maybe not all kinds of schools, but at least maybe just architecture schools, to put as an example, where they are very much in like merged with cultural institutions of architecture or art and architecture, art, architecture design, etc., where there is a joint program and you somehow have that space. I think students should also have access to a working space in some kind of school where they can come together.
But it's important here, I think, also in this discussion to maybe separate between the two different, because Artem, you brought up, you know, and Lara was also talking about the social aspects of in education of the
At
community
large.
and the campus and all of these things. And then I think obviously one thing that we have noticed with our students is that without getting too personal, of course, people being at home, people's home situation is so incredibly varied that some people were absolutely fine and some people were absolutely not equipped to do a complex project because of their home situation. And that's of course something that has concerned everyone who has been forced to stay at home. But then, so that's one discussion. And then I think the other discussion is to dislodge this whole discussion from the pandemic and the lockdown and look at architecture and media in going back to what I think is just so interesting. Like, why does it work? If people have a good situation where they're physically, you can complete an architectural project in education by in literally this format we're doing now. Like, how is that even possible? That it is, of course, many people in architecture might be fully involved in models and other ways that where it's very complex. But obviously in our situation, it has to do largely with the fact that we're dealing with architecture as representation, which most architects do. Right? Even if you are, the aim is to design buildings that are going to be built physically, it's still just representation as long as you don't pick up the bricks yourself, which means that this is just another form of representation, which I think we both agree in our view, has so much more potential than being bodies in the same room. Like the digital interfaces that we are beginning to see. We just began a new teaching job in North America, where the amount of tools that are being introduced and that are being recommended to be used, I think in the end it's like 7 different kinds of platforms that are used for conferencing and shared pinboards and class recordings and lectures and transcripts and
Blackboards. Yeah.
the possibilities are, even if we don't yet talk about VR, we just talk about what we can do on a screen. Like, architecture is so ready. I think it's just, I think to answer your question, I don't know what you would say, Artem, like what kind of new architecture will come out of this. Certainly in many ways, I think it's more efficient to exchange ideas about architecture. Unless, I mean, of course, if you go and see buildings yourself with people, there's something you can, at the moment, not replace with anything else. But exchanging of ideas is a completely a revolutionary moment, I think.
But how do you create the environment to create meaningful social bonds? And I find it really exciting to bridge distances, because that would mean that you don't need to have to afford moving to London or moving to, I mean, I grew up north of Spain. There's no architecture school in the region where I grew up. I had to move, pay for an apartment, shared apartment, whatever, and then not everyone can have access to that. So,
but that's a very interesting point, because I was like, to make it like to like to make kind of a bit extreme point, you know, we were discussing also before this lecture, like one point came up was maybe you all know, like sometimes on Facebook or somewhere in the news you see, I don't know, MIT has, or Oxford or Harvard has published all the lectures for last 100 years from all best, I don't know, philosophers, architects, whatever, and so on. And if we kind of take this, why do then people, why doesn't everyone become like instantly like the most smart, most experted PhD and so on for free in a moment? Why doesn't everyone just lock himself in the room, look all these lectures?
We don't yet know this because they just start to publish. So probably in 5 years there will be a lot of anonymous professors from poorest countries who will become these amazing people, highly educated without even visiting the school.
Yeah,
So,
that's just very interesting for me. Like I completely agree with you about the possibilities. My question, does it really work? Because like as you say, for instance, one restraint is our own homes. Like you said, that sometimes maybe the fact that you are physically in some other space and you have no other I don't know, like things which distract you or bother you, you're forced to communicate and think on a certain topic. And it's true that people have different situation. If you're, I don't know, a single person with, like, I don't know, with a cleaning lady in a, I don't know, in a perfectly sealed apartment, it's one situation. If you live on a farm with 20 siblings, it's a different situation, you know. And like basically when these two people come meet in a classroom, they kind of become equalized. And then, I mean, this is an interesting point that I'm not at all disagreeing with you that this is the time of change and the possibilities are grand. It's more the question, will it, like, what actually maybe prevents us from getting like all the knowledge immediately, you know. And like yeah, that's, I think that's also an interesting
I mean,
topic.
I think, but we have seen people with just with an internet access, which not everybody has, and that has to be acknowledged, that we're assuming that the internet is this widespread infrastructure, which is not. But we have seen people self-training themselves as coders, as developers. How many? I mean, most of them start like that. They don't go to school to learn that and then develop. Become professionals and have a career like that. Well, I think I don't know what you're gonna say, but like there is a super strong community where you can find that motivation. I think it's not just that MIT publishes all these lectures. No, there are chats, there are all kinds of types of channels, YouTube accounts, like where you connect with other people. And I think that is fundamental in order to find the motivation. You need to feel like you're part of something.
And I think the follow-up question here, I don't know what you guys think, but if you take the example of like game designers or coders, anything that deals with digital economies, then all of the training is happening without institutions and at the speed which is incomprehensible. And you, I mean,
and with ethics
yeah,
that are sometimes terrible and sometimes like even stronger. Like we are seeing free software that continues to be developed. God knows how they are doing the funds. No, we're seeing initiatives in anything that has to do with digital technologies that are really remarkable, really scary examples.
So I mean, one could ask the question is, since there is in that case no institution, could you say in the way of learning? I mean, if you imagine that like architecture schools as these institutions that give out diplomas.
Recently, I started more and more to kind of like whenever the students don't know how to do something like in a software, it's not that I don't even feel, or I don't even think the urge to, like in the old times, maybe the professor would kind of take out his pencil, like put the ruler and it's show how to draw it. I don't even say, I'm like, oh, but guys, why don't you just YouTube? Like there's probably a million of tutorials. Don't even ask this kind of like I don't even send them to the professionals who work in the school who teach them the digital technologies, although there are these people and obviously I respect them and they're doing very valuable job, but still, like I don't even, that doesn't even cross my mind. I just say, just go and YouTube it. That's very interesting.
but the other thing I think which we didn't discuss here, it's more kind of technical aspects of education, like about receiving the knowledge, but as well there's like this emotional communication with the professor and students and also among the students. And as well. I think this university is kind of a laboratory where you try different chemistry, and then many good offices, many like or majority probably even, they started as students who studied together. So it's first like very often friends, then they continue to do business together. And for example, me and Leonid, we also met in university. And I can assure you, we met not doing the same project or studying. We even didn't study at the same professor. It was more like how to say, happy students time. And so I think like could be compensated somehow this part of educational process, this emotional, informal part. Like, can you through chat, through video calls, can you integrate, like develop certain like similar connection to with someone else? Because I mean, actually, I never had experience in online dating, so it was every time mystery to me how how it actually works. So probably, but sometimes it's like Tinder. It's also should develop a certain.
I think that is something. What you just talked, you opened this comment about, as you refer to as emotional connection or social connection that are bound by.
I would say
by,
what you're asking is the role of carnality in architecture education. So when you put it like that, sounds a bit strange, but it's not just emotions, but it's just being physically there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's something we deal a lot with in our research and exhibitions, but also with our students, to try and figure out really what really is it that makes a difference in this carnality, like what, like bodies being in the same room, sharing the same buildings, sharing the same streets. Because if we again revert it and look at the tech industry, which is by the nature of our work an industry that we have a lot of connections in and that we try and infiltrate, and we try and stay updated, and you constantly meet people who have very vibrant careers and social lives, but they might never have met any of the people that they work with ever. They might live in Winnipeg, North Canada, or in some other distant part of the world, and be really influential people, might even be, you know, making stellar careers. And what we see, at least, is some proof that those social connections they're real. And of course, I think no one would dispute that, but one would say, okay, so now those are real, and we accept that these are real, good social connections. Like what we will have to do when we now in September, October, go back to teaching again with new students that we won't have ever met probably. But it's really interesting to think about, like, what is the role for architecture in this sense, both for education, but more generally, of the bodies being in the same room. Because I think this, and I love this term, which comes from a Rick and Morty episode, where Rick calls Morty a fucking holophobic person, like against hologram people. Don't be so fucking holophobic.
That is like racist against holograms.
Yeah.
People that are there as holograms. That is something. It came up a lot in our studio, because some students were doing experiments where at the AA bar, they were opening a window onto a virtual bar where people was joining there as avatars. So it was kind of very make do with a projector, and then you could see those people there, and there was microphones, and you could capture, and you could quite seamlessly hang out with those people. But some of the people at the bar were being really holophobic, and they didn't want to talk to, or like they felt it was just too awkward to talk to those people who were there as holograms. So that's quite hilarious.
Meanwhile, we have a couple of comments in the chat, because
I just want to finish with this topic and probably raise one more question, but kind of closing up this scope. It's funny because when you start to reply my own question, I just realized that this summer we had 3 trainees in the office whom we never met in person, but within this like summer internship, I think we received quite close, even emotional connection. So now I feel them like almost if I would knew them, even though mostly we speak like by text or sometimes calling each other, but we even didn't use much video calls. but I think it was productive enough. And I don't know, probably Leon would disagree with me, but actually surprisingly, I would say apparently kind of certain chemistry possible through absolute virtual connection. And here, since kind of it's agreed that this new media of teaching works not so bad, I want to quickly discuss this question, which we start to discuss. What should we teach in the university? Should we really more teach this like craftsmen, so we know what kind of skills should student receive to go to the architectural office and work there properly? Or we should offer something completely unknown to us and try together to find out like which direction generally architecture should go, do more experiments, but in this experiment risking a lot with the final result without actually honestly knowing where we're aiming to. And what is your current approach, let's say? Let me ask this way.
Yeah,
well, maybe before we go into that, I just say that like I find that there is a major difference between meeting in video calls or meeting in virtual reality, whether it is through your computer or through a headset, but in spaces that have basically spatial audio. That to me makes the whole difference, because you can face people, you can talk to people, you can step aside and have a side conversation, which is what I find that the video call is really, really lacking. And that is really problematic. And that's why I would much rather give a lecture in a virtual space, because in the end, people could approach me and talk to me. And feel like they're talking to me without having to wait for a queue. But now moving on to the next, I don't know what you were going to say, onto what you were just shifting into.
Yeah, the question about balance of technical, also practical approach and experimental approach.
Yeah, I think also coming back again to Sam and Tom's discussion, I think Sam has a really interesting perspective that I think I would at least share, that architecture is one of these magical professions that constantly keeps developing. We have a question here that refers to intellectual or phenomenological approaches. There's constantly like rules and ways to read and ways to think about architecture being established and written into stone. But more than almost any other profession, it's completely in flux, depending on what's happening in the world. And I think that's at least one of the reasons I think why I was even interested in architecture in the beginning. And we're referring to Alain de Botton's very simple but amazing book, Architecture of Happiness, where he talks about just a very simple fact that like we know which buildings are good. Like we can point at them in history, but we never repeat them, right? We not build, so that was a good building. Let's just build that one again. And we just build endless Michelangelo libraries. I mean, it's specific to every... Yeah.
We don't talk about those things.
Yeah. No, but it's specific to every moment in time. And I think that's what's so amazing with architectural education, that at least there are a few institutions around the world that we have been very lucky to be involved in, like INDA, that we were teaching at, not at the same time, but an institution, but that by and large, and the AA also has an approach that no one knows what architecture is really good for, or can agree at least, or what architecture should be. There's just thousands of theories rolling around at the same time, and the world keeps changing. I mean, I think this is also the most amazing proof of this whole discussion around what is this big revolutionary strange moment going to do for architecture. And there's many people have been teaching very specific things that will be completely relevant even beyond this pandemic, even if but there are many things that will have to change, and this is not going to be the last thing that we have to encounter. And if we have our 20 plus or 30-year-old graduates who are going to have really, really long careers, where at least in our teaching, like we are 100% convinced that the architecture in the next 20 years will be, you won't be able to distinguish if it's virtual or physical. So like, what kind of architecture do we need to, some of us needs to think about that, at least, for instance.
But
it's
the
just
thing
one small thing.
with the kind of vocational approach, or like the approach to teach in skill-based or draftsmanship, or versus, I don't know, like whatever you would call the other, more like theory-driven approach, which in commercial terms it would be like an art director of some kind, right? I think it would actually help to start breaking down the architectural profession in these slightly different specialized roles.
The dangerous conversation everyone has there.
People get really annoyed at this, and I think it's, I understand that it's complicated, but I mean, you come out of architecture school and there is several things you can do, and I think that should remain the same. But I think you should understand what are these titles that you can shoot for when you're looking for jobs, when you're because it just seems like now everyone wants to like come out and build and do a lot of stuff, and it's like, oh my God, there's so many more things you can do than that, that are purely architectural. And yeah, I mean, now people only seem to feel that they either you go and work for a big office, or you try and like start your own office with a lot of blood and sweat and tears. And I think there is already a lot of us practicing some weird in-betweens that, and we don't know what that is called. And I think giving names to things is tricky, but it would also be helpful for people to understand what roles they're pursuing. So whether architecture schools should do this or that, I think there should be a wide range and a lot on offer, but it should be clear what are those options that you're having and where are they headed, which I think at the moment people don't know. And they join different studios and they don't really know where they are headed by joining that, because it doesn't have a tag or a label.
Lena, what do you think? I mean, having taught in many different places, I mean, both of you, in different continents and different on this topic.
No, for me, I think it's a very interesting topic in a way. How, let's say, I mean, we can theorize also, but somehow, for instance, the school where we were teaching in Switzerland, in Geneva, it's a very kind of practical school. And basically half of the projects are collaborations of the school with real clients. So they have some institutions, I don't know, institution of handicapped people, or Caritas, or I don't know, like sports club, or I don't know, the government of, or University of Physics, whatever comes to university and asks the students to think about some building. And therefore the projects are very particularly practical. And at first, when I came to the school, it was very surprising, because let's say, I mean, I was studying first in Marhi, and our professor, who's the head of currently Marsh School, Eugene Us, he used to give very, let's say, sometimes he used to give very kind of experimental and thought-provoking tasks. And at the same time, later I went to Columbia, where also I had been in studios which were purely speculative. And then suddenly I have to teach something which is, in a way, forces me to make the studio as a kind of a copy, or like as a resemblance of an office, you know, because if you need to come up with like a real project for a real client, and he will come to the reviews, he will speak to the dean, he will kind of give marks, that kind of puts a big pressure on you. You know, you can theorize, you can speculate, but in the end you have to make students kind of do it. So that was very complicated. But then I thought that actually, even like with some effort, like even these type of projects, you can look at them through a certain prism. And like, I think personally that we should not even in such conditions make like a studio, like a copy of, like a little copy of an office. I think this is really limiting. And even if the school kind of, I don't know, the concept makes it more practical, I think we still need to kind of come up with some kind of bigger meaning of the project, which, and I think this is very important to transfer to students, that even if we are doing a very practical task, I don't know, like designing a kitchen for a certain building, we still need to think about it conceptually, to speculate about, and to see the overall kind of social, I don't know, economical, cultural context, and then kind of come back through several iterations to the scale of a kitchen in a certain building. And I think this is very important. So maybe it will sound banal, but I think that, like in many other questions, the truth is somewhere in between. I think it's not that the studio should be like a practical, like a place where you just prepare people for you know, going to internship in an office. And at the same time, it should not be completely detached from reality. And I think that this kind of, the best is probably somewhere in the middle, where the practicality, but also the big thinking, the speculation, the fantasy meets. By the way, guys, just when we will have a pause, there's many questions. Maybe we can choose one or two that we can answer to the people, because I think we already went a bit further, and there's still a couple of interesting ones.
Questions. I just here, like, to sum it up, I think Lara said very important thing, that all the directions needed, but they should be named properly, and you should know which studio is it, what we will receive in the end, because this conflict which we discussed, it's kind of lies like it's grounded in the field of architecture, which spreads very much from very technical construction, solving problems on construction side, to very experimental, almost artistic work. And then of course, like, the range of each studio lies like more to artistic, closer to artistic or to a technical field. And that's indeed very important, because for example, if I'm a student with let's say unlimited I can choose any university which I want to apply for, and I'm looking to the best architectural studios, universities in the world. I would look, for example, at like Columbia University in New York, and ETH in Zurich. And there are like three completely different schools. And I know that they even like from one of the schools, if you like graduate one of the schools in one certain type of office, you're extremely not welcome, because you assume to be not the person who would fit the, let's say, workflow in this type of bureaus. And in these terms, of course, it's very important that people are aware from the very beginning, because I remember myself being a student. I have no clue. I just decided out of blue I want to study architecture, and then you just get into the school, and you rely on the people who's teaching you. And if these people don't discover for you the whole image, the whole like all the possibilities in architecture and variety, and pointing very clear where the focus of the studio lies at, I think it not 100% fair to students, especially at the very beginning. And here probably like last thing which I would ask before we go to the questions, where do you think should lies this balance in between what we discussed, being a mentor of the studio, where you're kind of preaching, guiding, like being a guru of a studio, or being just advisor who coordinates you in your personal search in architecture? What would you think, Lara and Frederick?
Yeah, I think we thought quite a lot about this, but maybe we might not agree also. But I think one thing on this topic, which doesn't include all of the facets, is that we are quite often in opposition with other opinions, where you often see, especially in design studios, tutors giving the opportunity for the students to come up with things themselves. We're certainly in the other camp, where we try as good as we can to teach as many things as we can, like literally how to use software, how to analyze things, or how to and within that give opportunity for students to discover or work with things that really inspire them by themselves. But of course,
I mean, you try to provide a
I somehow lost the connection. I don't hear anything.
Yeah, me too. I think Lara and Frederick, if you hear us, you're frozen.
Let's say like 3-4 months, and ideally then you shift completely into the role of an advisor.
Sorry, I think we lost you for last 10 seconds. Could you repeat?
Yeah, I was just saying that you try to be this, like, okay, provide an intellectual framework, also provide tools for a few months, like usually for us it's like 3-4 months, and then you hope that you would switch completely into the role of an advisor. And I must say that it works when you are ready for that. And also I think it works very well also when you have also your projects on the side and you're ready for the students to take on their projects as their own, and you really take a step back. And that is really nice. And you hope
but also
that
we have had the pleasure, which I'm sure you have also had the opportunity to do, which to teach something that you anyway spend your life doing. I mean, in the last
Yes.
5 years or so, it's been.
I think most people know, because also the design studio, the option studio now, as it's called in the US, and I don't know if also in Russia, but it's now really widespread and global. And it's a bit crazy. I mean, going back to what we were talking about before, that like with these specializations and things not really being labeled, is that also sometimes students need even more, or like you need to be following through much more, because maybe they have ended up in a place that they did not expect. And if you apply that to other disciplines, I mean, the AA started this whole studio guru kind of thing, no, where you have different studios and you can pick one. But now there is this weird lottery methods and so on, where you can end up somewhere where maybe it's really not what you expected. And if you apply that to other disciplines, imagine that you go to, like, I don't know, do a master and you're a doctor, and then you're randomly allocated to a specialty in medicine. It would be insane. Like no one would. So I think that is actually a bit strange. But anyway, I'm bouncing to things
I
that.
mean, to be honest, I totally agree with you, because I do believe that you have to teach what you believe in, what you know how to do. Like if someone would ask me to teach the aspects which I don't know, it would be strange to pretend. And
Actually, here, that's an interesting point, because here I would, that you said that, Artyom, and like continue what Lara says, that if you were told how to teach or what to teach, because here we touch a bit upon, like, I think one topic which really interests me recently, it's the kind of the democratic decisions on what to teach in school. And I think in this sense, or at least, I mean, in AA, as we, at least we are foreigners to AA, but we know from media that there is this whole idea of voting every year, that some even highest figures can be fired because of the decision of students and also the staff of the school. So kind of I perceive it, or we perceive it from outside as a democratic process, but basically appointing certain figures means also appointing what to study. So like if you take, I don't know, 10 people with the same viewpoint, definitely the school will change. So that's a very interesting point. Like continue this, like what if I'm told what to teach? What like it's actually a question to all of us. Also, I question myself. What how should the school develop in a way, like how much is the participation of the student body in the big strategical decisions of school should be? Because obvious question, like we should be democratic, we should give the voice to the young people, but at the same time there is a kind of controversy, because if a kind of a young person wants to study, so basically he acknowledges the hierarchy, like from the point of, like from the moment when you say you're a teacher, I'm a student, you acknowledge the hierarchy. It's not like we come into the office or cooperative and we equally respect each other. So then this is very interesting and tricky question, which kind of also deals with the politics, with the whole kind of almost like the whole model of society. But what do you guys think? And the last thing to add, because I also experienced it, because in our university in Geneva, we received the open letter from the students, which was very kind of radical, and it followed up the protests in the United States, the anti-racist protests. And I think in Geneva or like in Switzerland, this topic is much less hot, let's say, than in United States. But somehow it was right in this moment when students said, we want that you teach us this, this, and this, and this. We want the teaching body to be this, this, and this, and this. We should hire this amount of this type of people, this amount of this type of people. We should add these classes and remove these classes. And the school, of course, reacted very positively and very respectfully. But at the same time, for me, just a conceptual like moment of like, how does this democracy of students versus teachers should work? What is your point? What is your take on this? Especially coming from AA with this tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I think the examples that you brought up proves that democracy is not a fail-safe mechanism for equality. I mean, there is racism and inequality in democracies, and the AA is not an exception. You know, that also has problems with representation, and just because you have a vote doesn't mean that you automatically have the space to speak. Right? There is still, it's more, of course, everyone has a vote, and we're speaking going back to architectural education here and the AA specifically, and our vote counts the same as our students and counts the same as people that work in the library or have whatever other admin job at the AA, which by and large, of course, I think I can see that, of course, part of the reason why there has been such much success is because there is this mechanism where people feel empowered, and also literally things can change relatively quickly. But it's not a guarantee for a system or a school to be good, generate good ideas, or for it to be a nice and pleasant space to work and study. In the case of the AA, for us, it has been, both of us study there. We're now teaching there, and for us, it's been incredible. But it is not a clear-cut kind of, at least for me, a kind of like every school should be democratic. I think that.
But I mean, that's so obvious. I don't know. For me, when I was at the AA as a student, I didn't find this whole participation model as it was fine. It's like fine, I can vote for things, but then it required a level of involvement that I was like, well, I wish we were spending the time having these conversations about architecture and not about the AA constitution over and over again, which we did excessively back then and now again. But I think every school should be like that, where students should have a voice to express how they, to basically contribute to the school in how they think it should move forward. But I think an area for student participation that is completely overseen is how much are you allowed to teach while you are a student? Because a lot of when you come out and practice as an architect in its many forms, it's going to be to communicate with people and to communicate feedback and ideas. And we usually think that this skill falls under group work, which is really not at all. And I think it falls under teaching. And for me, the second school was the school I went to teach right after I graduated. And I keep on saying that, like, my God, I learned so much more almost through those first years of teaching.
Which is an experience that we share with you, because it's the same school where you went to teach.
In Bangkok, where it was like, oh my God, now I have to be productive. I need to think productively and strategically about all these people's ideas. I also need to think emotionally so they feel good about their creative work. And that is just incredible. And I think we do that very little with our with students. Like, we try to promote that, to do that in our unit, where you join as in tutorials a lot, and you get to follow a number of projects a lot. But I think that's an area for student involvement that is at a lower level than like the overall structure of the school, that I think is completely overseen. And I think it should be a core part of your education, to become involved, really engaged, and almost feel responsible for the success of somebody else's project, because that is a lot of what you're going to do when you come out, I think.
What do you guys think? Who have had, I mean, we had a similar experience, at least for a while, in Bangkok.
Well, it's just like, there's a very difficult, let's say, words in my experience. The more democratic the system is, like educational system, the more freedom you give to students, the more time you offer to reflect, to make decisions by themselves, the less productive they are. If you would think about, like, let's say, semester, like amount of images, beautiful renders, and even probably design could be less impressive when you take like absolute utilitarian approach and like hush, you do that. But at the same time, that's again like the question what we want to end up with, like who want to grow, like the guys who just produce drawings, or thinkers and philosophers. And here I think it's probably even possible within one group, when we just have to be, there's no like one approach, you have to be more attentive to the personalities of the student. And also the students shouldn't be ashamed and should like be brave enough to reveal, to understand their personality. The sooner the better. Someone really perfect in production, and that will be a very strong part. And someone is less productive but very conceptual, very like with amazing deep theories and ideas, but which never perfectly presented. But probably that's also not the biggest problem as soon as he can really explain these ideas. And I don't know, for the discourse, for the whole discourse, is much more important every time to have someone who shift a bit these limits of the like group and start to like speak, let's say, beyond normality, beyond like this normal expected borders of discussion. And then I think this provocation, to me, I'm very thankful every time and happy when I have someone like who can challenge other people to think differently, because as a professor it's every time more difficult to play alone when you have someone from the students who plays this kind of role of the like widow or like this like a bit of alien. It's every time very, I think, fruitful. And this, I don't know if it could be done from, it's probably very difficult to administrate these things, but this combination of more like productive and more conceptual type of people in one collective is very, I think, important.
Maybe if I could jump in here with a question for myself, and at the same time switch the mode of conversation to Q&A, because we have really lots of very interesting questions. What I wanted to ask, when we started the conversation, I think, Laura, you were saying that, or Frederick, you were saying that, quoting maybe Tom Emerson or someone from the beginning of our series of conversation, you were saying that surprisingly, architecture schools could adopt to new situation quite well. And I started thinking about this word surprisingly. Why is a surprise? And one thing is that probably we might be surprised because we tend to think about architecture as something that is very real, connected with space, with body, personal experience, and so on. And we would be expecting that the less amount of real contact would affect very badly the educational process. But at the same time, we could also think that architecture always is very connected with technology and social structures and communication. That's what architecture is probably as much about as about space and then body. And maybe that's why we'd change the mode of communication and the mode of education very easily. I mean, I don't know about other schools, maybe everyone did this the same way, or maybe someone really did it much better. Other than architects, I don't know, actually. Maybe lawmakers are much better in this, or maybe, I don't know, doctors. So, Artyom, what you were just talking about is you were asking the question, what do we want to have? What do we want to arrive to in the end of this educational process? So yes, so I think it's a very good question. And the question may be, what do you think? What is more important for our I don't know, situation or society in general? These social structures or spatial structures. In the first case, democracy for the sake of communication and interaction could be just as good as drawing and making models. I don't know, but that's a question. What do you think?
Now we can jump in with one thing that I think, I mean, so to go back, Alexander, to your highlighting of the point, surprisingly, and that especially what you said, maybe if you would say in December, you send out a newsletter to every single architecture school in the world and say, it's going to be in this format and online, and people will go like, it's not going to work. What the hell are you talking about? This is a disaster. And probably many people did have a lot of issues, but by and large, it seemed to have, at least for us here, seems to have worked quite fun. Surprisingly, even us would probably say surprisingly, who deal with these questions on a day-to-day basis. But I think perhaps the other point that you were raising, more kind of generally on architectural education and I lost my point now. Oh God.
What?
No, Alexander, you were talking about first about what we're facing, and literally the topic of this whole series, deschooling in the age of quarantine. But then you were also talking about, sorry to ask you to repeat again what you were.
Yeah, I was asking, what do you think? What's probably or what do you like more? Architecture's a mode of social structures, interaction,
Oh, right. Yeah.
that thing, or
I
production.
mean, I would say just generally very quickly that I think that, and also responding to Leonid's point about why are we not geniuses now when YouTube is full of any knowledge we could possibly ask for, is that it's a gradient. Like if we look back at some kind of idealized version of a village and a tribe life where we don't interact with any form of media at all. There is no jump. It's a gradual stepping stone where, like, you know, what predates YouTube was other streaming service, not like television. You know, there's like many small steps throughout generations where gradually, not just architecture, but everything we do is operating through one form of media or another. Is that the book or the internet or television or radio, whatever it might be? Like there is no final state, physical state for. So I think like it cannot be a dual or kind of two-part question. It's totally.
But I mean, I think the conclusion is like, if you can create an environment in which you can bring meaningful enough social bonds are fundamental to learning because they give you purpose. If you isolate yourself, it would be almost impossible to find purpose in anything you're doing, right? So if you can create an environment in which you find it meaningful to pursue this purpose, and usually that environment means that you're surrounded by people that follows a similar purpose, and therefore you are motivating each other, then I think it can work as well in this way. And I think the fact that we would be, maybe if we're teaching architecture in this remote form, and in our case especially where we're like working or doing research in architecture that is not to become physical, does not mean that we remove the absolute importance of basically structuring social life, which is the only thing architecture does, whether it's physical or virtual. And for the sake of education, I think it will be fundamental that there is a mechanism to create these social bonds. And at the moment, the video call is not going to do it. So either people figures it out, including us, and drinks over Zoom is not going to do it either. So I think we're all going to head to a shock at the start of this new academic year in most places around the world in this format where we're remote, if we don't make an effort in understanding how do we create social bonds, because that is a big part of the value. I mean, there is a comment here by Sergey, hello Sergey, about offline institutions being social lifts. Definitely, I mean, that's what we were saying in the beginning. Like the role of the institution is to allow you to form that network. It can be completely reinvented, but still we'll need to do that. But I think
you know what I just thought also, that in a way, like if we take this conversation, let's say curated by Alexander, organized by March, that basically they have acted as maybe the pre-social bond in online. So basically the same way how, let's say, maybe in the element how you call it, caveman society, there was no bar, which was like a moment of social interaction, and then suddenly one guy decided to I don't know, serve drinks, open a bar, right? And therefore, like this moment happened, and then the things which Sergey is relating to, the social, like then the clubs, the elite clubs, whatever, like gives you social lift. secret government clubs and so on. The higher you can go from club to secret government, but whatever. When this when this was created, the whole idea of social lift and gathering together came to place. And then maybe like now we're living this really primary moment of this post-pandemic, like when, okay, we have to communicate through Zoom, but for instance, with you guys, although we had an opportunity every evening to call you and speak to you like hours, we never did it. And it's not like we just like, I don't know, it didn't came to our head. And then there was some guy, let's call him the bar creator, the bar
barman.
owner.
Yeah, the barman.
Not even the barman, but yeah, barman and also the bar owner, who started the architectural schooling in the age of quarantine, who made this possible, right? So he made this instrument. So I think there is a very big importance of also not only the actors, but also the people who make, basically it's a new institution. Like we are now, like it seems like we're just in a Zoom, but in the end we are now certainly in a speaking club, like online. So it's interesting to reflect on it and to see that probably there is a certain kind of responsibility and the very big importance of this type of people and movements like this, like initiative. For instance, we as architects, we did not think about it, and we are kind of passively participating. But I think it's a very big thing, and I think the institutions nowadays, they should kind of understand that this is also their responsibility and their role to make this happen. I would also
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please, Frederick.
No, I was just saying that, like, I mean, institutions have really stepped up, and individuals too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a question, or there's a comment here from another common friend from Bangkok, who has also done, Jean-Marie has also done amazing stuff with like responding to the situation, not only, but like, or Alexander, what you and what Marsha are doing, or what Architectural Foundation is doing. I mean, I think it has to be like celebrated, the kind of incredible effort that people has gone through to do the exact kind of thing that you just described, like bring us together in a way that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. And I think it's important to like properly value it and not to see it as like, maybe finally we'll be in Venice with some Prosecco. Not like, there is some real true value to these things.
I also think that I would say that there's also kind of desperation, because, and I think that it also reflects the way how the whole system is being transformed. There is a certain kind of people who are working as a connections between other people. They connect, they ask questions, bring people together, and so on and so on. And it was very, I think, it was always very important. And I think Malcolm Gladwell, a journalist and writer from the United States, he was describing them as actually, literally, as those who transfer viruses. It was his metaphor for people who bring people together. They transfer a virus. For example, in fashion, they bring best things first to a certain part of society, or they bring new ideas from one lab to another, and so on. These kind of connectors, they don't produce anything by themselves, but they bring stuff from one place to another. So yeah. I was thinking about it, that physical space was in academia. Physical space was very important for this kind of people because it was a resource, and I hope it still is a resource to invite, to come, to be a host, and so on, and a lot of kind of occasional connections, just people talking in the corridor and so on. And I would say that part of my personal agenda in this series of talks, of course, is informed by a feeling of loss of these opportunities, of loss of connections. So I'm just trying to fill the nest.
Yeah, I mean, it's also it has to be said that everyone is, a lot of people is feeling quite scared about this remote architecture school being successful because they feel that they will lose those social connections, but they will also lose their privilege, the privilege to access those networks.
Yeah.
And I think more and more, I mean, Leonid, what you were saying, absolutely, no, the way that these things generate and the way that we get to sit here and talk to you is because we managed to kind of hook onto some kind of social network through which we are getting opportunities. And I think it's maybe the time that we start realizing that that is a privilege that often comes with being able to join certain institutions, being able to move to certain cities. And we should embrace the possibility to break that and to break that privilege, both in maybe making remote access more widespread, but also acknowledging that we have that privilege and that we can share it. And that every time you get invited to do one of these things, you can actually think about all those people who would not get invited because they are not part of that network, and be like, hey, maybe I point you towards this other people who, for random reasons, never get invited to anything. I mean, I see that all the time, even comparing like people that I know from Bangkok who are incredible and they are doing their stuff there and their events, and that never mixes up with stuff that is maybe happening in London or stuff that is happening in New York and LA. How can that be possible in a world
That's
where
also
we have...
a very good reply to Sergei's question, no? Like about the social lift. Yes, maybe like it is built in a very kind of local way, but in a way it also gives opportunity for everyone to participate in things like this. So
but it's also a system of exclusion and of like exercising a tremendous privilege. I mean, people at the AA started freaking out when they had this visiting school where you have these schools happening all over the world. And with that,
you have been involved in them, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we did the 2 or 3.
And when that started, the fact that those programs were awarding diplomas, some people that was studying at the AA thought that was outrageous. And it's like, because that is breaking your exclusive club of London, right? And I find that very problematic, that we are agreeing now that there is the necessity for physical space because we create these bonds, and at the same time we don't acknowledge that that is it's a system of exclusion in itself.
But there's a possibility for inclusion in this new way of doing
if
things.
People, if everybody makes an effort and realizes that.
I don't know if that's your experience.
No, I think that
cannot make it easier because there's the only privileged person, the one who speaks, and the rest who's joining and who's listened to. And then technically or supposedly everyone like from the audience, in case he asks interesting question or whatever, could raise interest of the organizers and then be the next speaker. So I hardly can imagine that would be more democratic way of communication than actual video calls when everyone who has device and access to internet to join. And you know, like kind of continue a bit Alexander's reference. In Russia, we had a saying like about some old universities that the walls are teaching here. So you kind of enter in the space and then you kind of receiving the knowledge through just being there. And of course, like there is a quality like of like this special aura of the space, which you really feel like you must learn, or you have to be not worse than the one who was before you. But on the other hand, if we would think about the actual education, probably all the ceremonies, they're kind of secondary, because of course we know like this very legendary space, like I don't know, steps in Columbia University or in Moscow University, there was a architectural institute, there was a fountain, and it's kind of the symbols. But on the other hand, it's not about to belong to certain symbols. It's about to produce, like to study, to produce knowledge, and to learn something new. And in these terms, of course, like it's the most efficient and probably democratic way of communication. And indeed, I think if you're interested here, find new place to get, like, for example, I would never be able to speak with, let me to sound like very famous architect, let's say, if I would like some time ago. Now I can find his email online and write him directly. And if the email is good enough and sharp enough, I could hope that he would reply me, and we could have direct, actually, like direct communication, which would be absolutely impossible to imagine some years ago. And this, I think, absolutely great.
But yeah, but you need to have that attitude, and you need to have a certain way of speaking.
But this attitude
that
you
is,
need to have in the real world as well. If you're shy and you never ask the question at the lecture, you would never. I mean, it's the patterns of
yeah,
behavior.
but that is when you are talking about then issues of equity and people's backgrounds that need to be taken into consideration if we are to overcome like the degree of inequality that there is right now, right? So I see your point, and it's true, like things are right there, but the fact that things are right there doesn't mean that everyone finds them as easily available as we might do. No.
Let's answer the last question in our chat, and through that share our privilege of speaking in this particular Zoom. So the question is, perhaps we need to make a big shift in how we need to find ourselves. I think it's the question from Alexandra. I'll try maybe to rephrase it a little bit. I think there were two questions combined. One is, do you think that this assumption or this feeling of a radical shift that lots of people share, especially on social networks, do you think this is real or just a kind of acute reaction to something very new, which is reasonable, but do you think that there is a real shift that is kind of going on somewhere under this technological new stuff? And I think the very important question, I think, which is also in there, is that will it help us to reinvent not only the educational process, but maybe the image of ourselves? Do you think that it will help to reflect, to introspect, to identify maybe our own selves in a better way? Maybe not ours, but maybe our students, I don't know, future generations, whatever. So maybe, I don't know, maybe less social bonds could help to be more self-sustained person. I don't know.
I think it has helped a lot of people, and actually some students have felt quite empowered by being able to be behind the screen. So I think if that is what I understand from the question that I'm reading here as well, I think, yes, it's an opportunity for overcoming issues of physical identity that we could completely do without, and it certainly facilitates that. So.
But mainly with new communities, I think, because in our experience with existing communities like the AA, the same.
It also helped some people.
Yeah,
actually.
but by and large, as a school community and education, the power structures that existed in physical space exist also in virtual space.
But people were saying that they didn't feel like like when you have to be waiting in a corridor, you have for a presentation and you feel completely terrible, or like little things like that, or like no one is in one side of the table or the other side of the table. I think it has helped a lot.
Well, what have your experience been?
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting question. I mean, this in general, like, if what I see there, like in these questions, first, is there really a shift? So that's also my question, because actually what happened, like nothing new was invented, nothing new has happened. We were Skyping 5 years ago already, or 10 years ago, you know, but the scale of it and the totality, kind of the bigness of this event really made it everyone feel that it's a change. So I think it is a change. And yeah, and second, about speaking about this whole idea of like whether it brings more equality, less equality, like more involvement of people, of like this is really interesting. I never thought, actually before this talk, I never thought about this this way. And kind of my pessimistic viewpoint would tell me that for sure society would find a way in the most democratic and flat structure like internet to find ways to put hierarchy. I mean, already now we have all these kind of paid accounts, like where you don't have I don't know, shitty advertisement and higher speed and higher quality and so on. So I'm pretty sure like now we're in a lucky moment when maybe not all the kind of money-making forces in the world realize like all the possibilities of, let's say, putting hierarchy. So I think now we really feel this moment of potential equality through this situation. I'm pretty sure like maybe we can check it in like 10 years from now. What will the, let's say, society in large create in order to put a certain, like, I don't know, exclusive clubs online, you know, or exclusive Zooms, or like, I don't know, maybe lectures where you have to pay tons of money, or you have to be, I don't know, a certain, like in China, socially number in order to enter our conversation, you know, like the same way how in privileged nightclubs they don't allow people in cheap clothes. Sometimes the same way maybe like imagine that in China they have.
I
this
mean,
new
of course, that will there is gonna be exclusive clubs and so on. No one is imagining that everything is gonna be completely open. But if you look at a wider arch of history, you will see that the tendency is towards openness.
No, but I'm completely for it, Lara. I'm not saying I'm very happy, and I think we're participating in a very positive moment of history. I'm just more like thinking, let's say, in future, like whether will it be going to this utopian potential, like real democracy, or not.
How we need to find ourselves. And the thing is, now even this lecture structured exactly as a copy of like the physical lecture. We have several people which allowed to speak. Some people can anonymously, mutely ask questions. We pick the questions we're interested to reply. So that's absolute copy of the physical lecture. We just sit distantly, and the whole like structure works this way. I'm not sure that we really have to rethink it, because I don't know, probably if it exists for so many years exactly in this format, it's the most efficient one. But the fact is, what we discuss, like we're in a new world, we're actually in the same world, but just with possibility not to travel to see each other. And that's the only difference. And as I understood the question, like to refine ourselves, to find ourselves in a new position, new situation. I'm not sure that this technological shift should force us to rethink the whole social system. Should be probably the other way around. The new like social structure requires new technical equipment to accommodate it. And well, I don't know how to reply this question, because I think there's no actual answer from my side.
I just in the end of this conversation, I would just like to share a piece of experience of online teaching that I had this summer, having lots of new opportunities, as many of us. I try myself in remote education with really small kids, like 9 to 12. And it turned out that this in my teaching experience and in experience of teaching through Zoom, it was the only audience where I really felt I need my body to be included in the process, because I wasn't able to control the way they're speaking with my own voice, because I cannot speak as much and as loud as they can. And I remember from my previous experiences that body could be a real powerful thing, because you can show something with your hands, or you can move from some kid that is too loud to those who are less loud, and so you can control the environment, the teaching environment through your movements. And this was completely impossible in this situation. So they just talked a lot, and I had to wait till they will say everything they wanted, and I could continue. So, but it was still it was fun and something new.
But you were doing that over a video call with small kids.
Yeah, it was Zoom, actually, the same kind of.
And one more question.
Funnily enough, I've been doing that with kids. Well, we've been meeting my niece and nephew a lot in virtual space. and that works.
When you're a little avatar.
When you're a little avatar moving around and you can pull models very easily, they learn things, they learn to do things that we never taught them. And like we meet regularly and play random games, like where we play hide and seek in weird worlds. And so I think it's because what kid likes to sit down and talk like this? No, but they like to do things. Like, how are the kids gonna sit on video calls? I mean, I have fever dreams thinking of all these kids that are doing school online. Poor things. They like to do stuff. So it's, I mean, I think it just goes against the nature of a child, no?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, sorry, Sasha, continue.
No, that's it.
I know. I was just wanted to say that you know, like in Bible, they love to give us kids as the example of the behavior of the adults, and in these terms, we obviously can see that kids often don't accept digital world before we introduce it to them, and as soon as they see cartoons and everything, they stop to move. So probably we also have to bear in mind that at that moment it's too attractive and too interesting, so we can just sink, drown in digital and forgot about the real. Because during all this conversation, I somehow was thinking that is it the moment where we could, or did it happen before, we could have this like complete split in occupation of designers and actually production of the architecture. Because like if architecture at the very beginning wasn't an occupation, it didn't exist, was a mason who was just dealing with stones and moving and cutting stones, and that was the designer and the constructor of the very beginning. And nowadays we more and more often facing that architects who even sit and work in the office professionally, they have less and less clue how actually this process done on the site. And even though they imagine that they will build it this way, when you come into construction site, the guy will tell you, come on, it's in the books written this way, we do it differently. And then now, as soon as we build everything completely digitally and imagine the whole building 100% in a digital model, probably it could be constructed according to our plan only by drones or like by mechanisms. And is it the future of architecture? Or I don't know if I should ask with a question now, or
I would keep it an open one.
No.
We have it an open one, so
I have to finish actually.
so we have an open end.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for taking part in these conversations. And I really thank also all of our viewers and listeners in Zoom and on YouTube, and our interpreter Sergey also for his contribution to this conversation. We will have more events, but we don't know yet all the dates and names. So follow our announcements in the social networks and on the website of our program, theschooling.march.ru. Thank you very much. And those who are starting academic years right now, because March is starting in October, so we have just maybe 2 weeks to reflect. Good luck. I mean, those who start, good luck. Fun. And yeah, hope to see you soon.
Great. Thank you, Alexander, and thank you, March School, for inviting. And thank you, of course, Space Popular and Frederick for being with us.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
See you again.